Listen closely. Closer. There's a sound beneath the sound, like moths eating through silk curtains in a room where no one's entered for years. That's the sound of a man discovering his worth by measuring the silence that follows his departure. Machiavelli whispered it first, though he stole it from older shadows. Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are. But here's what the old fox didn't tell you. Sometimes the greatest demonstration of power isn't in what you reveal, but in what you withdraw. Like a candle that only shows its true brightness the moment before it's snuffed out. Picture this. A man sits at a dinner party, surrounded by laughter that sounds like breaking glass. He's been the sun around which these lesser planets orbit for years. The one who pays, who entertains, who validates their small victories and smaller dreams. Then one night, without warning or farewell, he simply stops. No dramatic exit, no slammed doors. He becomes what the Japanese call kuki, the air between the air, present but absent, there but not. The first week, they barely notice. The second week, they make jokes. By the third week, something shifts, like watching milk slowly curdle in summer heat. The texts arrive like desperate moths against window glass. Where are you? Is everything okay? Did we do something wrong? But here's the grotesque beauty of it all. He's conducting an orchestra of anxiety from the silence of his absence. Every unanswered message becomes a mirror held up to their own neediness. Every day of his ghosting reveals the architecture of their dependence, brick by crumbling brick. The ancient Stoics had a practice, premeditatio malorum, imagining loss before it arrives. But what happens when you become the loss others never thought to imagine? You discover something that tastes like copper and enlightenment. Most people don't miss you. They miss what you did for them. They mourn the services rendered, not the soul that rendered them. There's a fungus that grows in old European cellars, Zasmidium cellare, that only becomes visible when you stop looking for it directly. Scientists discovered it thrives on neglect, feeds on darkness, grows stronger in abandonment. It's been there all along, waiting for the right conditions of absence to reveal itself. This is what you become when you master the Machiavellian disappearing act. Not gone, but transformed into something that exists. The peripheral vision of those who claimed to love you. I knew a man once, let's call him Marcus, though that wasn't his name, and he wasn't quite a man anymore, not in the way we usually mean it. Marcus had spent 17 years as the reliable one. The 3 a.m. phone call, the emergency loan, the shoulder for tears that always seemed to flow toward him like he was some sort of emotional gravity well. Then his mother died on a Tuesday that smelled like burnt coffee and hospital disinfectant. And something in him died too, or perhaps, more accurately, was born. He didn't announce his transformation, didn't post about setting boundaries or self-care journeys. He simply began the most elegant subtraction of self from others' equations, declined invitations with the gentle persistence of snow-covering footprints, let calls go to voicemail, where they accumulated like dead flies on a windowsill. 6 months later, I saw him at a bookstore, reading Schopenhauer in the philosophy section, and he looked immaculate. Not happy, exactly. Happiness is for people who still believe in endings, but whole. Like a circle that had finally closed itself. When I asked him about the others, our mutual friends, he smiled with the patience of someone explaining rain to fish. They're still there, I imagine, but I'm here. The 2024 research from the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology revealed something delicious. When people voluntarily reduce their social availability by 70%, Their perceived value increases by nearly the same percentage. Scarcity creates worth. Absence manufactures desire. The less of yourself you offer, the more they hunger for crumbs. But here's where it turns savage. You must disappear completely, not partially, not passive-aggressively. You must become what medieval alchemists called nigredo, the blackening, the complete dissolution before transformation. Any half measure, any peek from behind the curtain, and the spell breaks. You become just another person playing games, not a master of the ultimate game. Tell me something, and be honest. Though honesty burns like whiskey on an empty stomach, when was the last time you tested your worth by withdrawing it entirely? When did you last become the experiment instead of the constant? Or are you still there, reliable as death and taxes, wondering why they take you for granted like oxygen, necessary but invisible, essential but unnoticed? The Machiavellian vanishing act isn't cruel, it's clarifying, like walking through a house you've lived in for 20 years, with all the lights suddenly off. You realize you know it by touch, by smell, by the creak of the third stair. You don't need them to see you anymore. You've learned to navigate in darkness. And in that darkness, paradoxically, you finally become visible to yourself. Why the heart grows fonder of what barely acknowledges its existence. There's a story they tell in Prague, though they tell it quietly, and only after the third glass of Becherovka, about a clockmaker who built a heart that beat backwards. Every tick pulled time inside rather than pushing it forward. People came from across Europe to see this impossible thing, this mechanism that grew younger with age, that accumulated power by reversing its very nature. The clockmaker died alone, of course, but rich. They found him surrounded by love letters from people who'd spent their lives trying to synchronize with his backwards heart. This is what Machiavelli knew, but wrapped in political metaphor. Love, like power, is allergic to desperation. It flees from outstretched hands like smoke through fingers. The more you grasp, the less you hold. The universe has a perverse sense of humor. It gives most generously to those who've learned to shrug at its gifts. Picture the scene. A woman sits across from you at dinner, her eyes doing that desperate dance of seeking approval. She laughs too quickly at your mediocre jokes, touches your arm with calibrated frequency. She's performing availability like a one-woman show nobody asked to see. And you? You're already gone, aren't you? Checked out before the appetizers arrived. Because humans, those beautiful broken contradiction machines, are hardwired to want what retreats from them. Behavioral scientists in 2023 discovered something that would have made Freud choke on his cigar. The anterior cingulate cortex, that ancient bit of brain that processes social pain, lights up identically when we're rejected and when someone is simply indifferent to us. But here's the twist that makes it all deliciously dark. The same region becomes hyperactive when pursuing someone who demonstrates calculated disinterest. We literally become addicted to the chase of the unavailable. I once watched a man destroy a marriage without saying a word. Let's call him Dmitri, though he was too elegant for such a common name. He'd mastered something beyond indifference. He'd achieved what mystics call vairagya, the colorless color, the taste of water, the temperature of skin. When his wife spoke, he listened with the perfect attention of someone thinking about something else entirely. When she cried, he comforted her with the mechanical precision of someone following instructions written in a language they don't speak. But here's where it becomes exquisite torture. He wasn't cruel. Cruelty requires caring enough to hurt. He had simply learned to exist in the subjunctive mood, perpetually hypothetical, forever conditional. If he loved her, were he to care? Should feelings arise? He lived in the grammar of possibility without ever conjugating into the present tense. She spent 7 years trying to decode him, 7 years of interpretive dance around his silence. She learned 6 languages, hoping one might be his native tongue, studied psychology, philosophy, even astrology, anything to map the territory of his indifference. The more he withheld, the more she offered, until she'd given everything to fill his nothing. The Sufis have a saying, "The beloved is one who ignores you beautifully." They understand what modern romance forgot. That desire is architecture, and architecture requires space between the pillars. Without distance, there's no journey. Without journey, there's no story. Without story, there's just 2 bodies occupying the same coordinates, mistaking proximity for intimacy. You want to know the secret that makes Stoics weep and psychopaths smile? Here it is, served raw as winter wind. The person who cares less controls everything, not because they're powerful, but because they've made themselves the mountain that others must climb. They've become the question others spend their lives trying to answer. But mastering calculated indifference isn't about being cold. Any fool can freeze. It's about achieving the perfect temperature of maybe. Warm enough to keep hope alive. Cool enough to prevent certainty. You must become what the Greeks called kairos, the opportune moment that never quite arrives, the promise that stays perpetually promising. Consider the midnight text that goes unread until noon. The compliment acknowledged with a nod. The declaration of love met with, "That's nice." And each response calibrated to give just enough to prevent departure, but never enough to allow arrival. You become the slot machine of affection, random reinforcement, unpredictable rewards. And we know what happens with slot machines, don't we? They create the strongest addictions. There's a parasite, Toxoplasma gondii, that rewires rodent brains to find cat urine attractive, ensuring the mouse walks willingly into the predator's jaws. The theater of calculated indifference works similarly. It rewires the pursuing heart to interpret absence as presence, silence as speech, indifference as the deepest form of attention. A philosopher once asked me, after enough wine to make truth inevitable, what's the difference between being mysterious and being empty? I told him the truth that nobody wants to hear. About 3 months, mystery is just emptiness with good timing. So here's my question for you, delivered with the tenderness of a paper cut. How many years of your life have you spent warming yourself at the cold fire of someone's disinterest? How many nights parsing the grammar of their silence, looking for hidden meanings in their absence of meaning? Or worse, have you been the one dispensing measured doses of maybe, watching others orbit your indifference like planets around a dead star? The theater of calculated indifference only works because we're all desperate for a story worth telling. And nothing makes a better story than the love we had to earn from someone who barely noticed us earning it. Why we drink deeper from what we know will kill us. In medieval villages, when they wanted to destroy a community without warfare, they didn't attack. They poisoned the well. Just enough toxin to make people sick, but not enough to taste. The villagers would drink, fall ill, recover, and drink again. Each time a little sicker, a little weaker, but never quite dead enough to stop returning to the only source of water they knew. This is love in the modern age. This is every relationship you've ever stayed in past its expiration date, knowing it was killing you softly with its familiar poison. Kierkegaard wrote his most beautiful passages about Regina Olsen, the woman he left at the altar. He spent the rest of his life writing love letters to her ghost, crafting philosophies around her absence. The woman he could have had became the wound he wouldn't let heal. Because here's what the melancholy Dane understood. We don't fall in love with people. We fall in love with our own beautiful destruction. There's a phenomenon in chemistry called hormesis, where small doses of poison actually make organisms stronger. The body learns to fight what hurts it, develops antibodies to suffering. But increase the dose just slightly, and the same mechanism that built resistance becomes the pathway to annihilation. This is exactly how toxic love works. It starts as medicine and ends as addiction. I once knew a woman, brilliant neuroscientist, published researcher, could explain the mechanics of heartbreak down to the last neurotransmitter, who spent 5 years with a man who collected her tears like some men collect wine. Every Thursday, regular as clockwork, he would orchestrate a small cruelty. Nothing prosecutable, nothing you could point to in court. Just enough emotional violence to keep her stress hormones singing, her attachment system in perpetual emergency mode. She knew, God, how she knew, every psychological mechanism at play. She could draw you diagrams of her own trauma bonding, map the exact pathways of her intermittent reinforcement addiction. She'd written papers on it, given lectures, and still, every Thursday, she'd prepare herself for the wound like a medieval saint preparing for stigmata, because understanding the poison doesn't make it less sweet. The research from 2024 is delicious in its darkness. Relationships with high volatility, alternating between extreme highs and lows, create stronger neurological bonds than stable partnerships. The brain, that treacherous optimist, interprets intensity as importance, drama as depth, chaos as connection. We're literally wired to mistake dysfunction for passion. But here's where Machiavelli's ghost starts laughing. We don't just drink from poisoned wells, we defend them. We build monuments to them. We write poetry about how that particular poison tastes like home. Because admitting the well is poisoned means admitting we've been slowly dying by choice. And that's a mirror too honest for most hearts to hold. The Japanese have a word, tsundoku, for books you buy but never read, that pile up around you like good intentions. But there should be another word for lovers you keep but never leave, who pile up inside you like unlearned lessons, each one teaching the same curriculum. This is what happens when you love the knife more than you fear the wound. Let me paint you a scene that happens in 1,000,000 bedrooms every night. She lies next to him, counting his breaths, calculating the exact distance between their bodies. 17 inches, the width of an ocean. She knows tomorrow will bring another small betrayal, another micro-abandonment, another grain of sand in the wound. But tonight, in this poisoned peace, she feels more alive than she ever does in safety. Because suffering you can predict feels safer than happiness you can't control. Schopenhauer, that prophet of pessimism, said we're all just pendulums swinging between pain and boredom. But he missed the third position, the sweet spot where pain becomes entertainment, where suffering transforms into purpose. The poisoned well doesn't just hurt us, it gives us something to do, a problem to solve, a dysfunction to manage. It makes us feel necessary in our own tragedy. There's a fungus in the Amazon, Ophiocordyceps unilateralis, that infects ants' brains, controls their behavior, makes them climb to the exact height optimal for fungal growth, then kills them. The ant spends its last days serving its own destroyer, building a monument to what's killing it. Tell me that doesn't sound like every relationship you've ever watched from the outside, wondering why they can't see what you see. But we all have our poisoned wells, don't we? That ex whose number we keep just in case. That situation we return to knowing exactly how it ends. That pattern we recognize but refuse to break, because breaking it would mean admitting we've been complicit in our own diminishment. Here's the question that should keep you awake at 3 a.m. when the world is honest and your defenses are sleeping. What poison have you been naming medicine? What destruction have you been calling love? And the harder question, the one that tastes like battery acid and truth. If someone offered you pure water right now, clean and clear and safe, would you even recognize it? Or would you send it back, complaining it has no flavor? The paradox of the poisoned well is this: we don't drink because we're thirsty. We drink because we've forgotten what it feels like not to be dying. When giving everything leaves you with less than nothing, there's a banker in Zurich who keeps a ledger of every kindness he's ever shown. 3 pages for his ex-wife, 7 for his children, 43 for his mother. May she rest in whatever peace the Swiss imagine. He tallies them like accounts receivable, these gestures of love, waiting for the universe to balance its books. He's been waiting 17 years. The universe, it seems, doesn't believe in double-entry bookkeeping. This is the joke that makes angels weep. We've turned love into economics, but we're all cooking the books, inflating our investments, minimizing our returns, refusing to admit we're running at a loss. Every heart becomes Enron eventually. Spectacular public collapse after years of private fraud. Nietzsche warned us, the man who despises himself still respects himself as one who despises. But what happens when you've given so much? There's no self left to despise. When you've become the negative space in your own life story, you achieve something beyond bankruptcy. You become the debt itself. I watched a man liquidate himself once. Not financially, though that came later, but emotionally. Piece by piece, he auctioned off parts of his soul to keep others warm. His dreams became kindling for his wife's ambitions. His health became currency for his family's comfort. His peace became the price of everyone else's happiness. By 50, he was a ghost haunting his own life, a remainder in an equation that no longer needed him. The 2025 studies on emotional labor reveal something exquisite in its brutality. People who consistently overgive in relationships show the same neurological patterns as gambling addicts. Each act of excessive giving triggers a dopamine release, not from the joy of generosity, but from the anticipation that this time, surely this time, the investment will pay off. The house always wins, but we keep doubling down on love like it's blackjack, and we're counting cards in a casino that's counting us. But here's where it becomes sublime in its savagery. Emotional bankruptcy doesn't happen suddenly. It's not a crash, it's a slow bleed. You don't notice you're dying by 1,000 paper cuts of generosity until you try to make a withdrawal and find the account empty. The well of yourself has run dry, and all you have left are IOUs written in a language nobody else speaks. The Buddhists have a teaching about hungry ghosts, beings with enormous appetites but tiny mouths, forever eating but never full. But they never mention the other ghosts, the ones with enormous hearts but no boundaries, forever giving but never whole. These are the real phantoms of our age, haunting relationships with their desperate generosity, their compulsive emotional philanthropy. Consider the mathematics of modern love. You give 100%, expecting at least 50% back, a reasonable return on investment, but you get 20%. So you give 200% because surely effort correlates with outcome. You get 15%. You give 300%, you get 10%. You keep increasing your investment as the returns diminish, not realizing you're teaching them the exact value of your worth. Nothing, divided by everything. There's a species of spider, Stegodyphus lineatus, where the mother literally liquefies her own internal organs to feed her young. She becomes soup for their survival. Scientists call this matriphagy. Therapists call this Tuesday in their offices, listening to another person describe how they dissolved themselves to nurture someone who's already forgotten the taste. The cruelest part? Emotional bankruptcy doesn't release you from your debts. It just makes you unable to pay them. You still owe everyone everything, but you have nothing left to give. You become a promissory note written on water, a check drawn on an account that never existed. I met a woman once at a train station, 3 a.m., fluorescent lights making everyone look like they're dying, who told me she'd given her boyfriend 17 second chances. I asked her what happened after the 17th. She said, "I gave him an 18th. That's when I understood. Some people don't give second chances. They give eternal chances, each one carved from their own diminishing substance, until they're nothing but the space between chances, the pause between forgivenesses." Machiavelli would appreciate the irony. In trying to be invaluable, we make ourselves worthless. In trying to be irreplaceable, we become interchangeable. The market floods with our emotional labor until it becomes valueless. Supply and demand, baby. Supply and demand. So here's my question. Served cold as a banker's handshake. What's your exchange rate? How many pieces of yourself do you trade for one moment of their attention? How many acts of love does it take to purchase one act of recognition? Or have you been giving away free samples for so long that nobody remembers you're supposed to be worth something? The economy of emotional bankruptcy teaches us the hardest lesson. Sometimes the most generous thing you can do is stop giving. Sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to subsidize someone else's emotional poverty with your own wealth. Sometimes you have to declare bankruptcy, not because you have nothing left, but because you finally understand that what you have left is worth more than what they're offering in return. How controlled demolition becomes the architecture of freedom. The Romans had a practice, damnatio memoriae, erasing someone from history entirely. Every statue destroyed, every inscription chiseled away, every mention burned. But here's what the Senate never understood. Sometimes the greatest power isn't in being remembered. It's in choosing your own erasure, in becoming the architect of your own ruins. There's a man in Istanbul who burns one possession every month. Started 7 years ago with love letters, then photographs, then furniture. Now he's down to essentials, living in an apartment that echoes with strategic emptiness. Visitors find it unsettling. All that space, all that nothing. But he smiles like someone who's solved a riddle others don't know exists. "I'm practicing," he says. "For what?" they ask. "For freedom," he answers, lighting another match. This is Machiavelli's final teaching, the one he coded in metaphor because it was too dangerous to speak plainly. Sometimes you have to burn down your own kingdom to discover you never needed a throne. Sometimes the only way to win is to make yourself impossible to defeat by making yourself impossible to find. The mystics called it phauna, annihilation of the ego. The psychologists call it radical acceptance. But I call it what it really is, the ecstasy of giving up, the dark joy of admitting defeat so completely that defeat becomes victory. You can't lose what you've already destroyed. You can't be abandoned by what you've already left. Watch closely when a building is demolished professionally. It doesn't fall randomly. It falls exactly where the architects of destruction planned. Every beam calculated, every support removed in sequence. The building participates in its own ending, collapsing with the grace of something that knows its time has come. This is what strategic ruin looks like in a human life. Not chaos, but choreography. I knew a CEO, brilliant woman, built an empire from borrowed dreams and caffeine, who one day walked into a board meeting and resigned. No scandal, no breakdown. She simply said, "I'm done being this person," and left. 6 months later, I found her teaching pottery in Crete, hands covered in clay, laughing like someone who'd finally gotten the joke. "I had to destroy everything I built," she said, "to discover what couldn't be destroyed." The neuroscience is beautiful in its simplicity. When we voluntarily destroy something we've invested in, the brain releases the same chemicals as surviving a near-death experience. Adrenaline, dopamine, endorphins, the whole cocktail of almost dying. We become addicted to our own demolition, high on the fumes of what we're burning. But here's the secret that would make Buddha laugh and Schopenhauer cry. Strategic ruin isn't about loss. It's about discovering what remains when everything else is gone. It's archaeology in reverse. Instead of digging up the past, you're burying the present to discover the future. There's a Japanese art called kintsugi, repairing broken pottery with gold, making the repaired object more beautiful than the original. But nobody talks about the moment before the repair, the moment of breaking. That satisfying crack when ceramic meets floor. The decision to let something shatter. The choice to become the hammer in your own destruction. Every mythology has a phoenix, but they always focus on the resurrection. Nobody talks about the decision to burn. The moment the bird looks at its nest of cinnamon and myrrh and thinks, "Yes, today seems like a good day to become ash." And that's where the real power lives, not in rising, but in choosing to fall. The 2024 research on post-traumatic growth misses the point entirely. They study people who grew after trauma, but they don't study the ones who chose their trauma, who orchestrated their own catastrophes, who scheduled their own apocalypses for Tuesday because Wednesday was booked. These are the true masters of fate, the ones who refuse to wait for life to destroy them and decide to handle it themselves. Consider the mathematics of strategic ruin. Every relationship has a half-life. Every career has an expiration date. Every identity has a shelf life. You can wait for the slow decay, the gradual degradation, the embarrassing decline. Or you can set the charges yourself, choose the time, control the collapse. There's dignity in being your own demolition crew. The Stoics practiced premeditatio malorum, imagining loss before it arrives. But the truly free practice something else. Orchestrating malorum, creating loss before it's imposed. They burn their own bridges while standing on them, just to feel the heat, just to know they can swim. Here's the final paradox, the last joke in Machiavelli's cosmic comedy. The only way to keep something forever is to be willing to lose it completely. The only way to be truly powerful is to need nothing. The only way to be genuinely free is to have nothing left to protect. So here's my final question. My parting gift wrapped in broken glass and possibility. What would you destroy if you knew that destruction was just another word for beginning? What would you burn if you understood that ashes make the best foundation? What part of yourself would you demolish if you realized that ruins are just architecture waiting to be reimagined? The liberation in strategic ruin isn't about becoming nothing. It's about discovering that nothing is just everything with the lights off. It's about learning that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is disappear completely, leaving only an echo of laughter and the smell of smoke. becoming the ghost story others tell themselves to explain why they're still afraid of freedom. The ultimate test of power isn't in what you can build, it's in what you can afford to destroy. And the ultimate freedom? That comes when you realize you are both the building and the wrecking ball, the architect and the earthquake, the phoenix and the flame. You've been waiting for permission to burn it all down. Consider this your match.